Hi, thank you for joining us today. I'm Tom Saunders. I'm President and CEO of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and we have an interesting webinar today. It's about Bear Run Nature Reserve, which is our flagship property of all the properties of the Conservancy. But first, I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. And this webinar is for our leadership and heritage and Evergreen Circle members and volunteers. So I just want to start by thanking you all for everything that you do. We couldn't be accomplishing what the Conservancy does without all your support, and we appreciate it so much. So today's webinar is on Bear Run, and most of you all are familiar with our properties. Bear Run is the most extraordinary in a way of all of them. It's the 5,000 acres that surrounds Fallingwater and has an interesting history and geological history. It's most of the Bear Run watershed, and it's a place that as the surround for Fallingwater sets the stage for that extraordinary architectural gem, but also is an interesting landscape in its own right. So during the pandemic, we found that people are getting out there more and more. We do have over 20 miles of trails at Bear Run, and we have had more people hiking and exploring our properties during the pandemic than we ever have before. And that, of course, includes that sort of experience at Bear Run. We have, I think in part because of the pandemic and so many people out walking and hiking and exploring, we've decided to do a campaign this year about the Conservancy's properties. And so we have a campaign underway to raise awareness about our properties. It's called 41 Places. So we do have 41 places around Western Pennsylvania that the Conservancy not only has protected, but still owns. And we invite you to explore those. Of all those, Bear Run is the preeminent in the sense of the largest natural landscape of all those properties. So I'll introduce our two speakers today, and as they begin, I'll also just mention that you should feel free to use the Q&A function and send in questions, and then we'll answer those at the end of our presentation. But for now, I'd like to turn this over to Charles Beer, who's going to tell us some about Bear Run from sort of a conservation science perspective. And Amelia Marin, who is our stewardship person at Bear Run, and so is working on the property every day and all its management issues there. So I'll turn it over to you two.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be talking to you today about this topic because it's pretty close and dear to me. It's been involved with my career at the Conservancy the whole time. And what I mean by that is I've got to get my slides to advance here. That this is called the barn. We refer to it as the Bear Run Barn or the barn at Fallingwater. You can see the old kiosk here that used to be there when I was actually living here at Fallingwater and Bear Run in 1981 for a little over a year. Actually, my wife and I had just been married, and we moved to live in one of the buildings and take care of the security at Fallingwater, if you can believe that, and also participate as naturalists and as resource managers at the nature reserve. But when we were there, I think that was probably the last time the Bear Run Barn was actually a barn. It's been refurbished now into office space, but it used to be where Freddie and Caleb lived. The Conservancy actually allowed us to move some of our livestock with us when we came to live and work at Bear Run. So during that time, I was able to get to know the reserve pretty personally, and that's what I would like to share with you today. I wish we were going for a hike. Getting out on some of the trails and experiencing that. And of course, we wanted to do this live and we're ultimately unable to, but let's promise to get out together and try to take a hike and actually experience the reserve and see some of the things that I'm going to talk about today in my talk, and Amelia will also cover with you. Let's get out on the trails and kind of brush elbows with some rhododendron and some laurel and experience the reserve for what it is in all of its glory. So if we were out there, what would we see? Well, Bear Run is one of the places in Pennsylvania you can go and see essentially all of the natural heritage symbols of Pennsylvania. By that I mean the Pennsylvania state mammal, the state bird, flower, and so forth. And here they are: the white-tailed deer, and the mountain laurel, and the ruffed grouse, and the eastern hemlock, and the brook trout. And most recently, Pennsylvania's added a state amphibian, and the eastern hellbender, the largest salamander in North America at over 2 feet long, lives in the Youghiogheny River. And the nature reserve actually runs from the top of the mountain down to the river. We'll talk more about that. Now, there is another state symbol. It's the state insect. Not every state has an insect, and we do. And it is the Pennsylvania firefly. And this is one that we know there are fireflies at Bear Run Nature Reserve, but we don't know if Photurus pennsylvanica, the Pennsylvania firefly, is actually there as well. But maybe we'll study that in the near future. One of the other symbols, not natural, but if you see the state dog while you're there, it should be on a leash. I would like to thank Brad Georgic for helping with this presentation. He helped in a number of ways. Brad has provided the photography, a lot of the photography, but in particular the aerial views for this presentation. And so here you can see a picture of Brad with his best friend, his drone flying right above him. And the other reason that Brad was helpful is that just before, as we're planning this presentation, people were asking, well, why is it called Bear Run? What's the source of that name? Well, I had asked Brad to go up onto the mountain, as well as flying his drone in various places, to get some photographs of some of the special habitats, and in particular up by campsite number 5, which this is up on the side of the mountain about halfway up. And he did so. He went up and he got a photo of the rock outcrop there that I was interested in. And while he was there, he said, at campsite 5, a black bear. And then he was, I guess he had gotten most of his photography done, and this bear started to approach, and he got out of there. And I said, well, Brad, send me the pictures of the bear. I really want to see those pictures of the bear. And he said, no, I just got out of there. So he wasn't in any danger, but he just decided to leave. So all I can show you is this photograph of a bear cub up in a tree that we got, I think, from the Pennsylvania Game Commission. So that's the story on why Bear Run is named Bear Run. So what I like to do whenever I go anywhere, and I encourage you to do so, and I want to share with you today, is to try to develop a sense of place. And I always do that trying to put on my geologist hat first. I'm not a geologist, but I'm very interested in it. And it means a lot to being a naturalist and an ecologist and a conservation biologist. So bear with me here and try to come with me and learn a little bit about this. So here is a map of Pennsylvania. It's an aerial photograph, a satellite photograph, and you can see the border of Pennsylvania is shown on here. That doesn't actually show from space. But if you look at this, what I want you to pay attention to is you see the lighter areas and then the darker green areas. And the darker green are forests. And where you find most of the forests in Pennsylvania is at high elevation, either up here in the high plateau in the northern tier counties, or down through the mountains, either through these very sharp kind of valley and ridge folds, or down through what are known as the Allegheny Mountains, which is where we need to go now, because that is where Bear Run is found. And Pennsylvania, so, is divided up into these ecoregions, and here they are named. And two of those are mountains. The Valley and Ridge has again, those sharp, rather abrupt mountains that you see. And then these large, more massive folds called the Youghiogheny Mountains, which for many reasons we refer to as the Laurel Highlands. Geologists are a colorful bunch, and all I mean by that is that they use a lot of colors to represent their geology. And so here's a map of the central part of Pennsylvania, and it shows you the geology at the surface of Pennsylvania. So each one of these colors represents a different bedrock type. And that's very important because not only does the bedrock create rock outcrops and those kinds of habitats and environments, but it also provides the basis for the development of soils. And because bedrocks differ in their chemistry and so forth, soils then differ. And because the soils differ, then you have different life found in different places. So here we have just a concept that I wanted to get through to you, is that the Earth is made up of different layers. They refer to it as like an onion. And here are rock layers in an outcrop, and you can see these are all different bedrock layers. And the one that is at the top and the one that was most recently at the top that may have been eroded away into soil, those are the ones that are most important and kind of dictating where you find life. And in terms of the Youghiogheny Mountains and the Laurel Highlands, I wanted you to look at these colors here. These sort of purples are actually the Pennsylvania period stones, in particular the Pottsville sandstone and the Youghiogheny sandstones are in these colors of purple with some green, and they create the ridges of the Youghiogheny Mountains, which are four. The westernmost being Chestnut Ridge, and then Laurel Ridge, where Bear Run is found. The highest point in Pennsylvania is here on Negro Mountain, and then the one that has the Youghiogheny, or the Pennsylvania Turnpike through it, the Youghiogheny Mountain, and that's where you go through the first tunnel on the turnpike as you're going from west to east. So those are the mountains, and if you zoom down in to a place like Bear Run and take away the colors and just look at a topographic map and where those different rock types are, it looks something like this mapping. And so this can be important when we're looking for certain habitat types and certain soil types to help us find the different types of plants and animals in a place like this. So as you're driving and approaching the Laurel Highlands or the Youghiogheny Mountains, you see these massive folds in the distance. And you know you're getting there. You can actually see something like this if you pay attention while you're driving from west to east on the turnpike. And then here's an aerial view from Google. And you can see here's Chestnut Ridge that I had pointed out before, running in from southwest to northeast. This is actually Laurel Ridge right here, the top of it. This, if you can see a difference in the green here, the trees, that's actually a wind farm that's found on top of Laurel Hill, very close to Bear Run Nature Reserve, which is represented here. So we have the Youghiogheny River coming through past the town of Ohiopyle and cutting through Laurel Ridge over here, and then making its way past the nature reserve and then cutting through Chestnut Ridge over here. And as it cuts through, it exposes different types of bedrock and different soils, and it's all very interesting. Here's a topographic map. This is the nature reserve, bounded in red. You can see it adjoins Ohiopyle State Park over here, and also some state game lands, number 111, on just over the top of the mountain. Here again is the top of Laurel Hill at almost 3,000 feet. And the nature reserve then is on what we call the west flank of the mountain. Here's the stream Bear Run. And within the nature reserve is another stream I won't talk about today, but it's Laurel Run, which is also quite nice. It's on the northern part of the reserve and flows into the Youghiogheny River over in this area. And why is there a Bear Run Nature Reserve? It's because of these people. the Kaufmann family. As they were establishing their business in Pittsburgh of retail stores, they would recreate. They were nature lovers. They were early conservationists, and they were looking for places to go to get away from the city and to experience the wilds of Pennsylvania. They used to take the train out from Pittsburgh, and later they would drive. But actually, at the mouth of Bear Run today, there's a set of railroad tracks, the same ones shown here. But this is what the railroad station looked like. It was called the Bear Run Station, and you could take a train from Pittsburgh and get off here and be able to go into the surrounding area. If you stayed on the train a little longer, coming from Pittsburgh, you would go to the town of Youghiogheny. So see that building right there, that old building. If you went and looked at that exact site today, it would look something like this. You can still see the foundation of the building. And you notice that the forest is much healthier now. The whole area had been cut over, and I'm sure the Kaufmans were a bit aghast at some of the conditions of the hills and valleys throughout this region, because they were nature lovers and they wanted so much to protect the land. So they adopted this landscape, and they found the mountain, some streams and forests, and they actually kind of settled in here and began to protect the land. At first, they lived in kind of a little cabin or house on the property. They expanded that property to be thousands of acres over time, almost entirely within the watershed of Bear Run. And then there was this organization in Pittsburgh that had been forming in 1932, and the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy was gathering steam. And after doing its very first project at McConnell's Mill State Park, a second project came to light, and that was to protect this area near the town of Ohiopyle. And this is called Ferncliff Peninsula. And here you have the Youghiogheny River cutting through Laurel Hill, and around, the geology forces it to take this long route around as it heads off to the west, and it created this peninsula. And here's kind of a side view of it. And there were some people in the town here that were very concerned as to what was going to happen to Ferncliff Peninsula. That's kind of its own long story, but it's very interesting. And they reveled the fledgling Conservancy to take on another project. And actually, it was with the help of the Kaufmann family that the Conservancy was able to do that. And so in the late 40s and early 1950s, the Conservancy started working on conservation projects in the Laurel Highlands, starting with this Ferncliff Peninsula. We owned this for a number of years, and then it became the core for Ohiopyle State Park. I think it was the success of that project and the Conservancy's success that impressed the Kaufmans. And so it was Edgar Kaufmann Jr. that then entrusted Fallingwater, which of course is the world-renowned house built on the stream Bear Run. He entrusted that to the Conservancy for all time to care for and to share with the public. So let's go back to the mouth of Bear Run, and you get this view of deep, unbroken forest so here we are with the river at our backs, and we're looking up the Bear Run stream corridor, and it actually comes this way and around and back up, and there's the top of the mountain way up there. And so I want you to just make a quick mental note of these. You see a slight color difference in some of these patches here, and those are conifer stands that we'll talk about a little later. But so the Kaufmans were surrounded with this deep unbroken forest, and Fallingwater actually is located right here in this valley. And you can see there's an aerial view giving you the environment that they were experiencing. The forest is, it's a forest of trees, but those trees vary. The soil varies, the moisture, the elevation, and so there are different types of forest, and there are quite a few species of trees at Bear Run, and you will find the different trees growing in different places, and you'll find different other species of plants and animals living in a pattern based on the soils and elevation and moisture within the reserve. So there are places in the reserve where the soil is very rich, and you have a habitat like this one, where you have wild ramps or leeks as part of the wildflower, cutleaf toothwort here, and you'll have large flowered trillium. That's actually somewhat rare to find in the nature reserve. But this pincushion moss, the moss I really like, and I find it when I hike higher on the mountain, where you have most of the forest types that are found composed of oaks and hickories on the mountain. And that's kind of representative of that forest type. I always like to lean down and give that a feel, or if there's a child along, it's a great experience to feel pincushion moss. Another forest type, however, is that of the eastern hemlock, remembering that this is our state tree. And where it is particularly cool and moist, you do have stands of eastern hemlock. If you look at an aerial photograph like these two, this being high on Bear Run, this is the stream. You can see the hemlocks are clustered around it because they're dark evergreens, and you can see them in the winter when the other trees have lost their leaves. And then here you can see in very lower Bear Run Valley, you can see hemlocks along the stream. You can actually walk this area, now remember that train station, well, that was right here. And there's a kind of an old wagon lane that goes up along Bear Run. You're looking down in the stream, and you can take a hike on that sometime. And it's actually part of the Fallingwater grounds. Bear Run, with its 20 miles of trails, is open to everyone all the time. But Fallingwater, to go there, you need to make arrangements, especially in these times with the pandemic. The schedule is varying. So please check our website and then find out the details to visit Fallingwater as a guest there. So the deep unbroken forest. I like this aerial that Brad took, because you see all of these light grayish green trees. These are white oaks, and that's one of the very dominant oak species in the nature reserve, and it provides a lot of value to wildlife, and a variety of insects feed on it, and then it's part of food chains as the birds feed on those insects and so forth. And so these forests are home to many other types of plants. Certainly the number of species of these lower plants outnumber the trees by far. And here's one of my favorite. I always like to go to Bear Run in the spring, first half of May into the middle of May. Perhaps at the end of April, the painted trillium will start to bloom, and it's a trillium of high elevation, so I don't see it where I live. I'm from Butler County, and a lower elevation, and in Pennsylvania, it only lives at high elevation. So I find it when I go to the Youghiogheny Mountains. There are some other plants that have a very limited distribution in Pennsylvania. They're part of the Appalachian mountain flora, and they're found almost entirely in the Youghiogheny Mountains or in the Laurel Highlands. This is a rare species. It's on the list of Pennsylvania rare species called buffalo nut. Here you can see its distribution in the world. It's found from Alabama, Georgia, north through the Appalachians, and just right into Pennsylvania here. Other species that are sort of like that, the sand grape here, the creeping phlox, very beautiful species of phlox that's limited in distribution. And then another one of my favorites, I love to walk along either the Youghiogheny River or some of its larger tributaries in mid-June and see the smooth azalea. So this is one of the rhododendron, and it grows right on the riverbanks. and you can smell it before you see it. It has a wonderful, very pleasant aromatic smell to it. And the forests are also important for birds. These are what we call neotropical migrants. They're from the New World. They migrate thousands of miles to get to their wintering grounds from Central and South America. And so it's very important that they have good forests to migrate through, but also these nests, they depend on the forest to nest in Bear Run. And that's one of our major conservation objectives, is to provide this deep unbroken forest for these forest interior bird species. I can go through them very quickly. Magnolia warbler, black-throated green warbler, hooded warbler, wood thrush, scarlet tanager, and the bird that I call the rhododendron warbler. The black-throated blue warbler is almost every time I see it, it's in a rhododendron, and so you find it at Bear Run along the streams. There are other habitats that are in the forest at Bear Run. Here's that rock that Brad was photographing for me when the bear came. And this is Pottsville sandstone, very rugged sandstone. Everything else is eroded away from around it. But it's there, it runs in lines and in big boulders, and it's habitat for a number of different species. And we're trying to provide this kind of habitat for species that are rare, some of which, like the top two, become persecuted. The timber rattlesnake is very rare at Bear Run. The copperhead on the upper left is seen every year on the reserve somewhere. And then a very interesting mammal, it's called the Youghiogheny wood rat, but when we're talking to the public, one of our biologist friends suggested that we call it the rock chinchilla because it's a better name. And this is a native mammal, and no one ever sees it, but it lives in these rocks, and it's declined to the point, somewhat mysteriously, it's listed as a threatened species now in Pennsylvania. One of the memories that I cherish about having been for that year at Fallingwater was we had to sort of patrol the grounds a little bit and keep an eye on things. And the best view I ever had of a bobcat was not this one. This one I took with a camera during a research project, a wildlife camera during a research project. But I was walking along to check on Fallingwater one evening after everyone had left, and here popped a bobcat out of the shrubs along Bear Run and didn't see me, was facing away from me, and I watched it as it just kind of weaved in and out, probably looking for rabbits or other prey, and I got to actually watch it for what seemed like a long time. It was probably 40 seconds or something like that. So that's the mountain and the forest. And here we have a gap in the mountain. So we ask the question, who rules the mountain? Water. It's the water god that rules the mountain. And of course, the water collects high on the ridges, gathers coming out of seeps and springs, and then begins to flow. Some of these very high seepy areas are habitats that are fairly unique. This is creeping bluets. It's a different species than the common bluets that we see in drier soils. This one's actually proposed to be an endangered, a Pennsylvania endangered species, and it's found in these seepy soils on the side of the mountain. And Bear Run then gathers at a very high elevation up towards the top of the mountain, almost to the 2,900 feet of Laurel Ridge, and then flows. And here you can see some of the data that describes this high gradient Clearwater stream. But it has been recognized. It has the highest rating for water quality given by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and that's exceptional value. And it's also been recognized as a wild and scenic stream in Pennsylvania. We look at it as an ecosystem, and probably the You know, the signature species for a stream like this that's so clear and cold is our state fish, the eastern brook trout, which has become very rare. And it may be a species that we're going to have to pay more and more attention to manage because of climate change. And it needs cold water to be able to maintain its populations. Just a very beautiful fish. If you ever have a chance to see one, they're really spectacular. And there are other species that are also spectacular, found in streams and found in Bear Run. And did you know about this one? This is one of the shrews. Now, shrews are kind of like mice. They look like mice, but they don't gnaw. They are insect eaters. And so they run around, and we have about probably 8 species of them in Pennsylvania. But this one is quite unique because it swims, and it has modified hairs on its hind feet, and it lives along streams like Bear Run, and it actually dives into the water and looks for insects in the water and can actually smell underwater. And ask me about that later, and I can go into some detail. But the water shrew is fascinating animal. And what's it eating in this ecosystem? It's eating aquatic insects for the most part. And this again goes to why we're protecting Bear Run in the stream, in addition to providing a clean, protected stream for Fallingwater, as the Kaufmanns had set up. We also see it as an ecosystem with some of the lower trophic levels on the food web as being these aquatic insects, and the caddisflies are one of the groups of aquatic insects that are found in Bear Run. And this study, which was done back in the late 70s, actually found 53, see at the bottom here in yellow, 53 species of caddisflies. This is one of the groups of insects that a biologist look to tell them about the water quality, is the diversity of caddisflies. So this speaks to biodiversity and actually what we're trying to do at the nature reserve. So Bear Run flows, here we are back at the railroad again, and it flows down and under the railroad and then into the Youghiogheny River that you can see here. The river's flowing left to right, or from Ohiopyle to Connellsville. In the distance, that mountain would be Chestnut Ridge that the river cuts through. And you can see along the edge of the river when the water's down, or at least at moderate flow, these open areas, and those we call scours. And the scours are there on this high gradient river that has lots of rapids and cascades and of course a few waterfalls. And those are special habitats that some species have adapted themselves to live in, and you don't find them in other places. This actually, as looking back, you can sort of see a little sneak peek of the railroad up here, but Brad has caught this image of the mouth of Bear Run coming right out here, and a scour area on the edge of Bear Run Nature Reserve, where there are some rare species living that are, again, adapted to that kind of habitat. They can take being flooded. We mentioned the sand grape before, one of several species of wild grape found in Pennsylvania. And then there's also the Carolina tassel rue up here in the upper right. And then one of the rarest species of plants in Pennsylvania on the left there. This is the beautiful barber's buttons, and it occurs only in Pennsylvania from Confluence to South Connellsville and along the Youghiogheny River. That's its whole population. And then it's found in other places down through West Virginia and Virginia, but is a species that could someday find its way soon onto the federal U.S. endangered species list, because it has declined somewhat and it is so rare. In Pennsylvania, it's listed as a state endangered species, but a very interesting plant in the aster family, or the sunflower family. And you can probably see it looks sort of like an aster. And here's a close-up of one of the halcid bees, the sweat bees, visiting the flowers. So that's mostly what I wanted to share with you on this too brief a talk or time that I have to share with you today. But I wanted to leave you again with the legacy that the Kaufmanns provided to all of us. And this particular view back at Bear Run Nature Reserve is very interesting. We think this is from the time when the Kaufmanns, who had a prized herd of Jersey cows in the barn there, they actually had they were running a dairy out of this barn, and had a farmer living in the farmhouse. This is looking back at those fields late in the time that the farm was actually functioning. And soon thereafter, the Kaufmanns would no longer want to keep the farm, but they realized that it was important to protect the soil. So they enrolled in a soil conservation program, and they decided to take all of their fields, or most of their fields, and see that they would be protected by planting them with spruce and Norway spruce and a couple of species of pine. So here is an aerial view of those fields in 1959. And if we then put that photograph along with that view, you can see this is the location of the person taking the picture. So they're looking back and across the farmhouse and the barn and out in this direction. And you can see that these fields match up very nicely with these over here. So the legacy that the Kaufmanns left was that they got the protection on the soil by establishing these conifer stands of Norway spruce and pines. And today, that looks like this. So here's a Google Earth view. Again, all of these plantings, now these open fields, here again was the location of the photographer looking back across at the farmhouse, the barn, and then out in this direction. And so the Kaufmanns saw that this area was protected. And you can see here comparison between the 1959 and then the recent photograph, and you can match up all of these shapes quite nicely and see. So this is has been the legacy then, and what's left for Western Pennsylvania Conservancy to be managing as part of the Bear Run Nature Reserve. Thank you very much, and I would like to turn this over to Amelia at this time.
Thanks, Charles. So I'll be talking a little bit about the management here at Bear Run. Here's a wonderful picture of our Paradise Overlook on one of our trails. We have over 5,000 acres to manage. I'm one person, unlike Tom had said, I don't get to spend every day at Bear Run, but it is a place very special in my heart, and I wish we could have been out hiking. So this is a
Amelia, I'm sorry. You have to bring your screen up.
I thought I did. Oh my, thanks.
Okay. Sure.
Now I'm confused. Sorry.
There you go.
It's not. Is that good?
You just need to make it full screen now. We can see the whole desktop.
Oh, shoot. What? This worked. Is that good?
There you go.
It's great.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that worked in practice, and I'm not too sure what happened.
It's all life on Zoom.
So here's Paradise Overlook. Here's the map of the preserve, over 20 miles of trail for you to enjoy. So if you were to visit Bear Run, we'd ask that you park in our parking lot just behind the barn. You'll see a white farmhouse next to the barn and a driveway up the hill. You don't always get a fawn there, but here is the kiosk with information on rules of the preserve, the history, and a map of the trails and other information of things you can do on the preserve. So unfortunately, we couldn't make it out for a hike, but I wanted to take you through a little tour of the property, of some of the gems that I love to see and are very prevalent on our property. In the springtime, around late May, we'll see the mountain laurels in full bloom. And then again in early July, the rhododendron, especially along the streams, it's really nice to view. And with our diversity of trees, we see so many different colors of fall foliage. It's my favorite to go along the Black Trail and see the ridges and the Youghiogheny. And in the winter, sometimes if you go after the fall of the snow, it's almost untouched. You see all the animal prints, and it's a really nice getaway because not often there's many people out there. So one of the first management projects I was that kind of Charles echoed was our conifer stands. We're currently doing a conifer stand improvement. So like Charles showed, here is the before, and essentially this is just the conifer stands were, put in those naked spots. And this is a leaf off imagery. So there are trees around the dark conifers, but it's just winter. So this is kind of what the conifer stands look like. It created sort of a monoculture, and each of the trees were planted 6 feet apart from each other. So even if the pines were native, they wouldn't appear naturally like that. So we took a gradual approach to transform this area into a more native forest. That came in the form of girdling and removing some of the trees closer to the trail. We didn't want to clear cut this area because that would bring other environmental concerns. So the girdling was done with a tool on the chainsaw, and these trees will gradually die. They are dead now, and a lot have fallen. The snags are also good for habitat for birds and other insects, and even when they're down, they provide good habitat. So I'll take you on a little tour on what we would see now. Going from the top of the canopy, we can see some beech trees. There's a tulip tree in the back, and there are some birch growing in, some red maple now. And on the floor, we see a lot of native ferns. This is all things we want to see come in. And it's awesome to see that regeneration happening. But one thing we do need to manage in these areas is invasives. Invasive species are not native, and they have the ability to take over the landscape and compete with native species. In particular, this area had a lot of Japanese barberry and some multiflora rose. We hired a contractor to come out and do that management, and we will be continuing to monitor this area and eliminate the species here so we can have a mass regrowth of the native species. Another program that we're enrolled in is called CREP. It means the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. It's funded through NRCS. These are old farm fields that we have on the property, and each of these plots are being regenerated in some sort of way. In the past, they had been leased out to local farmers. Unfortunately, we did not see sustainable management of these plots. So we decided to take them over. We put them under this program, and we are doing a variety of projects in these fields. This is a wildflower plot. great for pollinators. This is mostly Rudbeckia or black-eyed Susan. There are also warm season grasses planted along in there. We also did tree plantings in some of the riparian areas. But, you know, other fields, we decided to let go naturally. And this is something that you'll see today. There's tulip trees. I've even seen a lot of hawthorns and locust trees. Even you can see in the back, there's a big grove of smaller trees. Those didn't exist in the original field. And we can see that there's an army of tulip trees just going to come into that field and reforest it naturally. There's a lot of native goldenrod. This is exactly what we want to see. Continued management here is monitoring the invasives and controlling the invasives. Common ones we see here are honeysuckle, multiflora rose, and autumn olive. Like Charles had said, we really are proud of our hemlock trees. Being the state tree and that they cool our streams, they're very integral to the landscape. This picture is one of our biggest hemlocks. It's on a huge rock, way taller than I am. And this photo really doesn't give it justice of how large it is. And you'll see them right along Bear Run. And it's a wonderful sight to see. I love hiking that section. The shortest loop through it is the Orange Trail. And unfortunately, with climate change and invasive species, our hemlocks are being threatened by the hemlock woolly adelgid. So an indicator for the hemlock woolly adelgid, this is a pest that feeds on the hemlocks, and these white puffballs on the underneath of the branches give you indication that hemlock is present. This is only a moderate infestation. This is from one of our trees that we actually infested with hemlock woolly adelgid. This is a special project we have called the insectaries, and the purpose of the insectaries are to produce beetles. Granted, the beetles aren't there yet. We will introduce LN beetles, which are predatory beetles against the hemlock woolly adelgid. And so the process of introducing those beetles is maintaining these trees that we have. They're in a deer exclosure, and we have infested these trees, and we will later treat them with the beetles. The way that we're continuing to manage is to make these trees hedge-like, similar to the second insectary that we have on the property, by cutting off the tops and the extremities, so they're easier to study once we introduce the beetles. Here's Charles taking a stab at pruning these. Our hopes are that the beetles do well in reproducing in these insectaries, and that they travel to the rest of the reserve and help protect the hemlock trees that we do have. Just by that insectary, we have a wildflower meadow. This was made possible by a generous donor and board member. And pollinators are great, or the wildflowers are great to provide habitat for pollinators, and they also provide food for birds and other organisms. And what's nice about this wildflower plot is you can take the mowed section up from the farmhouse, and there's a little loop trail around through the flowers. Granted, they're best viewed late July, early August, but that loop will also take you to see one of our insectaries. We also have another wildflower plot just behind our ream house. And one thing we also are looking into is managing invasives here. There are tree of heaven here. So this waterfall has an interesting story. I kept on getting phone calls being like, I heard there was a heard there was a waterfall, and I was like, oh, interesting. I had just started in this position. I didn't know where it was, but I was like, okay, that's sure on our property. One day I took a look and I fell into one of the unfortunate events of monitoring these properties. This location, this is what's commonly known as Stewarding Falls. It's Crooked Run, that is a direct tributary of the Youghiogheny River. Unfortunately, there's a perpetual and historic dump on this parcel of Bear Run. And it's something that we want to protect the Yough, and we have, tried to get involved with the Game Commission to catch whoever's dumping, but we also depend heavily on our volunteers. This was an event years back to clean up this site. It was very difficult. I wasn't there, but I heard it was a challenge to get up the hillside. But with that help, they were able to collect this much trash and to help clean the Youghiogheny and Crooked Run. We really depend on our volunteers. I cannot do it alone. Bear Run isn't my only place I've got to be, unfortunately. And so here's a few of the things you can do as a volunteer with us at Bear Run. This is my AmeriCorps member, Alex, from this summer. We're digging tread to connect the one of the parking areas on Route 381 to connect to the Black Trail. We try to build our trails to be sustainable. That includes making the trails so that they manage water off the trail. We also will sometimes install infrastructure to make our trails more sustainable. This will make the experience better for our guests and also maintain the trail with minimal future work. This is an open stone culvert. This will manage water off the trail and the hillside, and rock lasts a lot longer, so that's some of the infrastructure we like to install on our property. We'll also have volunteers trimming along the trails, so you don't have to always rub up against the rhododendron. And we also will do invasive removal on our property. More heavy duty trimming. We don't allow our volunteers to use the chainsaw, but it's very unsafe for me to go out alone. So I like to bring partners to help me and volunteers to help me carry supplies, give advice, and move some logs. I really can't do anything on this preserve or I can do some things on this preserve without our volunteers, but they really are the backbone of the operation of Bear Run. And I know some of you on this call are very dedicated volunteers, and I am so forever in debt to you. And I appreciate all the work that you've done on the reserve. And if you're interested, please contact me. The volunteers make Bear Run what it is. Things you can do on the reserve. Of course, there is hiking over 20 miles. We have 5 colored loops on the property of various lengths. The trails offer so many different sights to see, the streams on tops of bridges, different ecosystems. So it's really cool to see the variety. It's what's made me fall in love with Bear Run. You can also fish, except for around Fallingwater. We also allow hunting on the property. Hunting season's coming up, or it's going on now, so please wear your blaze orange on the property. We don't allow hunting on Sundays. And please make sure to print a hunting permit online and sign it, and make sure you read the rules. This is only required at Bear Run. We also offer camping, and we have 5 designated campsites on our property. They're free. You just need to reserve them online. Along with the snow picture, you're welcome to cross-country ski and snowshoe on our property. So I hope to see you out there. If you want to know more information, please visit the Bear Run page within our website or email me. It's a wonderful place, and I want to thank you all for supporting Bear Run. And I'll take it back to Tom.
Amelia and Charles, thank you for great presentations. It's such a beautiful property. It's so interesting. We have Nicole Walsh with the Conservancy with us to organize answers to some of the questions that have come in. I saw that most of them are about the hemlocks and the woolly adelgid that's threatening them. So Nicole, I'll hand off to you.
Okay, hi everybody. First question, how do you contain the woolly adelgid so they don't spread from the insectary?
I guess I'll answer that.
That's a Charles question.
Hi,
Charles.
hi, folks. This is Charles Beer again. What we're doing with the insectary is establishing, them. We have two at Bear Run. We have one at another reserve, and we're actually considering another one beyond that as a way to produce colonies of these predatory beetles. We don't establish the insectary until the hemlock woolly adelgid is already in the area, so we're not bringing it to the area. We're just trying to get it established where we can manage it in these insectary plantings, which we have taken care of. We fertilized them, we pruned them, we've kept the weeds away from them, and there may even be hemlock woolly adelgid that comes into our insectaries from the outside. So I think that answers your question.
And Charles, your video is still off.
Yeah, Nicole did that to me.
Right into that before.
Here, I think you can maybe put your video back on now.
Okay.
So Charles, this is a question for you. What are the biggest changes to the reserve since you've lived there, do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting, knowing Bear Run for probably 45 years now. Just the changes, I mean, of course, these changes are often slow and it's hard to pick up on them, but in retrospect or comparing photographs, the changes over time, trees growing old, the vegetation getting more mature in a number of ways. I think also the reserve is probably getting more use than it was back in the day. So that would be most of it.
Charles, I'll just add too that the reserve has grown so much, that it was less than 2,000 acres originally when the Kaufmanns contributed, and we're at 5,100 acres now. So I know I've seen the Conservancy add a property maybe once every 2 or 3 years to the reserve, which has been nice.
So that was a question that was just asked. Is there a strategic plan to expand Bear Run?
Charles, you want to talk about our priorities, how we do
Yes,
that?
we have what we call conservation focal areas in landscapes, and we do planning around places like Bear Run, where we look at the ecological resources in the landscape and then map those out and which areas are most critical to protect to maintain those. And then we overlay the ownership on those. And if property, for example, would come available for sale within our priority area, that would be pretty exciting, and we would try to negotiate for more protection. We also try to create buffer on those ecological zones, and especially with climate change on the way, it's important that we have even larger buffers of natural vegetation to mitigate the effects of various things that are going on with the climate.
This is another question for Charles. Has the caddisfly study from the 1970s been repeated? Just curious about any changes in the water chemistry or the quality over the last 50 years.
It has, they've talked about repeating it. They actually have not done it. And it's not the only insect study that was done. There was a study done on the black flies of Bear Run, which again noted over 100 species of these small aquatic flies that live in the stream and are the basis for food chains and so forth. The water quality, in one way, we know has improved because due to stricter air quality regulations, acidic precipitation or acid rain is not the factor that it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. It has lessened quite a bit. So in that way, we do know of the improvement.
Okay. How long do you think it will take to replace the pine forest?
We don't know. Our concern was, as Amelia had mentioned, we didn't simply want to go in and remove the pines. For one thing, we weren't going to plant in there. We wanted Mother Nature to take the forest and bring it in to those plantations, but they were so shady, it was too much competition. So we wanted to remove trees in a fairly controlled and slow fashion, thereby also not making it as suitable for invasive species to move in. If we would just cut the pine trees down, remove them, that would create a lot of light, and invasive species would love to come in and be part of that. So we're taking a very measured kind of approach, and it's a long-term project. A lot of these ecological management things are long-term, and you know, we'll see the progress over time. Amelia was sharing with you what's happening in some of those old farm fields that were retired, and how some of the trees, like the tulip tree, is just coming in on its own fairly rapidly over a period of a decade. You know, you get quite a few saplings in the fields.
Okay, thank you. We're just about out of time. We do have some other questions, and we will get back to people individually. I want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you, Charles and Amelia. And I want to encourage you to get out to Bear Run and see it for yourself. And someone asked if we offer guided tours to ID birds and wildflowers and trees. And we do offer member hikes throughout the year. We hope to get back to that kind of activity soon. So we actually have a hike that's coming up. It's Tom's Run in Youghiogheny County. So
And Members Day also.
And Members Day, which is in May, and that's at Bear Run and at the barn, and there's guided hikes all day long. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting us, and we'll see you.
Thank you.